Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we're back from another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Massey out there trolling Trump, posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross post from the Thomas Massey subreddit, and that's Thomas Massey replying to some truth from Donald Trump. It's a huge wall of text, and he replied, "I ain't reading all that. I'm happy for you though, or sorry that happened." And yeah, personally, I would kind of agree with that. If Donald Trump wants to think Thomas Massey is the worst thing ever, I think he should be able to do so. But, it's interesting how he says, "Oh, I'm an America First candidate," yet he sides with Lindsey Graham over Thomas Massey. And he's pretty much just a neocon. Well, he's pretty much just, as I think I said in the last episode, he's pretty much just edging George W. Bush at this point. He might talk a great deal about ending the foreign intervention and putting America first again, but he's going to do pretty much the same thing as George W. Bush did back in the 2000s, or Barack Obama did in the 2010s, and keep America as the world police and do whatever Israel says. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism, posted by socialist or morons, and that looks like a screenshot from the Political Insider account. And it's a quote. I think that was a quote Zoran Mamdani says as the inauguration as mayor of New York City. We replaced the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism, posted by and then they added hail the collective. And yeah, personally, I think if collectivism is voluntary, I think it can be okay. But when a lot of socialists like Mamdani say collectivism, they mean forced collectivism rather than voluntary collectivism. If you want to voluntarily form a collective, I think that's fine. But if the state is forcing you into collective like it is currently, I don't think that's very libertarian. I think the libertarian position is voluntary collectivism over forced collectivism, as I've gone over many times in the past. Next we have breaking. Trump says elections should be canceled and warns there will be a constitutional movement from Mirror.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the No Filter News subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but everyone's always like the elections are going to be canceled when the outgroup's in power, but they never do seem to be canceled. So if you want to fearmonger that the elections are going to be canceled, I think that's fine. But it's like with a lot of things, nothing ever does seem to happen, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have prediction, major war by November, midterm election suspended, posted by Donald Key, and that's crosspost from the Blue Sky Skeets subreddit, and it looks like a tweet from a friendly purple alien. The United States will be in a major war by November, and the regime will use it to suspend elections. They will further use the inevitable uprising to impose martial law and suspend constitutional freedoms. It is near certainty at this point. The only question is who will we be at war with. And yeah, personally, I think that's kind of fear mongering. As I went over, if they didn't suspend elections during COVID, I don't think they're going to suspend them due to a war. I think they might have kind of foreign intervention to distract from stuff like Epstein, like they're doing with Venezuela currently, but probably no more than that. But ultimately, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens. Next, we live in a world that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power, posted by Fear the Creeper, and they added, interview on Monday, Trump's advisor Stephen Miller refused to rule out the use of military force to seize Greenland. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland, Miller said. We live in a world that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. And then it links to the source, which is a Reason.com article, I guess, on that Trump won't seize Greenland because he doesn't understand trade. And yeah, personally, I personally don't think the U.S. should be invading Greenland. But, ultimately, Miller is correct in that the world is ultimately governed by strength, force, and power, first and foremost, ultimately everything does come down to who has the strength, force, and power to get away with what, and that's very much how government works. If since the government has legal monopoly in the use of force, they can get away with pretty much anything they want to, and oftentimes there's no way you can even hold them accountable for it since they control the courts and legal system as well, and that's very much, I personally don't really care for the might makes right, but that's very much how life works. It's very much how physics works. If someone is stronger than someone else and is able to do something just by doing something, and they have the law on their side, oftentimes there's no way you can stop them. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump advisors discussing options for acquiring Greenland and U.S. military is always an option, White House says, from Reuters.com, posted by LegioX. And yeah, I personally don't really care for foreign interventionism, as I said with Venezuela. But ultimately, the U.S. government can justify doing whatever it feels like. Personally, I think Greenland, it's one of Trump's hyperfixations because I think he's probably on the spectrum, and people on the spectrum always get these hyperfixations, and Trump seems to have Greenland as one of them. He's really been on and off since like 2019 at this point. But regardless, ultimately the U.S. government, as I said, is going to justify what it justifies, regardless of what the law what the law says or what international law says. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about it, since they have since they control the legal use of force and the definition of what constitutes it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have peaceful protester arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights, posted by CH4Locks, and that's a cross post from the March Against Nazis subreddit. And yeah, it looks like a protester getting interviewed on a TV station. They get arrested. That being said, it just goes to show you the state can arrest you for whatever reason you want to, but it's important to remember as well that Reddit might be biased. Let's comment from here. It says, patrol officers and Uncensored search and the watch commander informed the officers that if individuals could be located, they will be subject to arrest. The adult one who was arrested was possibly identified by officers, and the lawful arrest was made. And yeah, apparently I guess he was marching on the roadway earlier, so I guess that was the reason they arrested her. But yeah, it just goes to show you that they can arrest you for whatever they feel like. They have the legal monopoly on the use of force to justify whatever they feel like. And that's my thoughts and on that issue. Next, we have White House rewrites January 6th history and blames police for a deadly attack on 5-year anniversary from CNN.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, the news site basically claims the violence on January 6, 2021 was instigated by law enforcement, and then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, it recast the rioters as the victims that day, and depicts President Donald Trump as a hero for granting sweeping pardons for the nearly 1,600 people charged in connection with the deadly attack. And yeah, personally, I think the Libertarian position on January 6th is, it wasn't good, but, and it was very much a Trump ego trip. But regardless, it's interesting how the left goes, all cops are bastards, but then they always defend the Capitol Police on January 6th. And, it just goes to show you that, people will always go follow whatever the narrative is, even if they have contradictory beliefs that says they shouldn't do that. And, personally, I think January 6th is very much this decade's 9/11, and that's the day being used to push an agenda above all else. It was bad, but, you just can't use it to push an agenda for everything. It's like how 9/11 was used to push the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. The January 6th is just being used to push a different group of authoritarians than the ones that are in power currently. And, that just goes to show you, they really are a uniparty. Stuff like January 6th is mostly just theater to distract from that. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, who is running the White House? How is dimension not obvious? Posted by Donald Key. And that's a cross post from the TikTok cringe subreddit. Pretty sure that's exactly what he did to Bubba. And that looks like Trump saying something stupid. And, that's very much Trump for you. He's always doing something, saying there's some stupid shit, and Reddit's always taking his bait. And yeah, it just goes to show you that Reddit, they really have nothing. That he lives rent free in their heads, and he takes advantage of that as much as possible. With that being said, I think it's funny how they're saying, oh, who's running the White House? I was mentioned the obvious when you had Biden in there for the past 4 years. He was pretty obviously had dementia as well, but Reddit didn't care. And just go to show you, Reddit only cares about who's in the in-group, who's in the out-group, rather than having any consistent beliefs at all. Next we have Jimmy Kimmel says Trump invaded Venezuela to distract us from Epstein files. What is he thinking? From TheWrap.com, posted by The Way to Beauty. And personally, I don't really care for Jimmy Kimmel. I think he's a DNC mouthpiece, but he's probably correct here. It's very much a convenient distraction from the Epstein stuff, and it's very much people moving on from one current thing to the next current thing. That's very much how people work. It's always whatever the current thing is. That's more of a leftist associated thing, but a lot of people on the right do it too. It's whatever the current thing is. Next we have Trump's Adventures in Venezuela Humor, posted by Baton Fortin. and that looks like a bunch of shit lib comics from Tom the Dancing Bug, which looks like a Calvin Hobbes parody. Donald John, a boy ex president, and his imaginary publicist. And yeah, I'm not gonna read all those because I have enough Reddit shit lib circle jerk already. But yeah, I personally don't really care for Trump's pushing the U.S. military into Venezuela, and but ultimately the U.S. government has the legal monopoly and force justify invading whatever country it feels like, and oftentimes there's nothing he can do about it. It's very much like Russia in that regard. Russia can invade Ukraine, and since they have the force of the state on their side, well, at least their state, they can sometimes there's often times nothing people can do about it. Because ultimately, what matters in life is who has the force and the means to justify force, means, and resources to justify what, and that just goes to show it's not a nice world. Some people will invade and do military operations in other countries, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have Utah begins 2026 by banning free books at all public schools statewide, leads U.S. in bans from bookriot.com, posted by CH Warlocks, and that's a cross post from the News of the Stupid subreddit. And yeah, personally, I definitely do think there shouldn't be overly sexual books in public school libraries, but Reddit says, oh, that makes them banned, and that's not true. If you're not arrested for having a book, it's not a banned book. And it's interesting how Reddit always goes on and on about banned books, yet they'd be flipping out if they saw you reading Mein Kampf or the Turner Diaries or the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in public. And it just goes to show you that, banned books is very much code for woke progressive books for them. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have ICE agents murder U.S. citizen in Minneapolis, posted by Patom13, and that's a cross post from the Public Freakout subreddit. And yeah, this was kind of the big story of yesterday. The woman was apparently, a lot of the right is saying, oh, she was about to drive over, and a lot of the left was saying, well, he'd already dodged out of the way, and each side has their own perspective of own clip they share, which each kind of validates their own perspective. And ultimately it just goes to show you that people are always going to see what they want to see, and it will confirm to all their biases. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the state. I don't think ICE should be out in the streets patrolling people and killing them. But ultimately, as I stated in the past, the government has a legal monopoly on these force justify doing whatever it feels like. And oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. And yeah, ultimately, it was just a high pressure situation that I think both shouldn't have gotten to be like that, and they shouldn't be killing each other. But sadly, that's how it happened. And ultimately, it just goes to show you that people are gonna draw whatever conclusions they want to see from whatever images they want. I saw an interesting post on the Political Compass memes subreddit, and it was a picture of in 2015 they had the black and blue dress, or the white and gold dress, or whatever people wanted to see, and now they have this video where people are going to want to see if they're more on the right, they're going to want to see it more from the ICE agent's perspective that he was justified in using lethal force, while if they're on the left, they'll more see it from the woman driver's perspective that she was just getting away and she wasn't going to run him over, even though some clips does look like the ICE agent is about to be run over. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Minneapolis driver shot and killed by ICE officer during immigration-related operation, DHS says, from NBCNews.com, posted by Mundane Image 13, and they added, fuck ICE, this was murder. And yeah, personally, Reddit, is very much a woke progressive website, so they're obviously going to be against whatever the ICE agent did. But it's if you want to agree with the ICE agent, you should be able to. If you want to disagree, if you want to think he was justified, you should be able to. If you don't want to think he was justified, you should be able to. Ultimately, you can cherry pick clips and angles of the thing that will justify your perspective. If you want to think he was about to get run over and killed by a vehicular homicide and just was entirely justified in killing the woman, I think you should be able to. But if you want to think he's not justified, you should be able to as well. Ultimately, people are going to see the world in a way that confirms all their biases, and social media is very much a symptom of that. People are always going to want to be in their echo chambers where everything is always going to confirm to all their biases rather than be challenged, and that's very much responsible for why the death of nuance is seemingly happened. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump proposes massive increase in 2027 defense spending to $1.5 trillion, citing dangerous times, and in parentheses, and to war small government proponents added again from APnews.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross post from the Moderate Politics subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for 1.5 trillion military spending. Ultimately, the government can spend taxpayer dollars and whatever it feels like, and if it wants to pump them all into our military, ultimately, I don't really care for that. But that's very much why I think we should have voluntary taxation rather than forced taxation. If you do want your taxpayer dollars to the military, I think you should be able to do so. But, right now, the taxpayer dollars are pretty much sent to wherever the government wants to justify sending them, and you pretty much have no say in it. I guess they could say, oh, you can vote, but, if voting mattered, they wouldn't let us do it. So, ultimately, you really do have no say, I would say. Next, we have Newsmax, ICE agent in hospital after car ramming attack, in parentheses, MAGA propaganda accelerating, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross-post from the March Against Nazis subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't know if the ICE agent is out in the hospital. He seemed to have dodged the car pretty well. But, ultimately, if people want to believe in these in the hospital, I think they should be able to. If they don't want to believe he's in the hospital, they should be able to. Ultimately, everyone will believe their own truth and conform to all their and justify confirming all their biases, especially in the age of social media. Next, we have third and probably fatal shot from Fast C Ruvinus 739, and that's crossed from the narco-capitalism subreddit. And they added from the ICE shooting in Minneapolis today. It looks like there was a total of 3 shots. This one being the final shot that's a few inches from her head through the open driver's side window. And yeah, personally, I don't think that you should just be pulling out guns and shooting people, even if they're even if they try to drive over you, or you can make the argument they were just trying to get away as well. But ultimately, as I stated, the state has the ability to justify using lethal force whenever it feels like, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it since they control the courts and legal system as well. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.